August 28, 1944. Northern France. The sun has long disappeared beyond the hedgerows, but the road does not sleep. Engines growl in the darkness. Headlights are hooded to narrow slits. Red tail lamps stretch forward in an unbroken ribbon, curving beyond the horizon. The air smells of diesel, hot rubber, and dust that never settles. 2.5-ton GMC trucks move bumper to bumper. No gaps, no hesitation, no silence. Every 30 seconds, another convoy passes. German observers, retreating east after the collapse of Falaise, pause along the roadside. They expect scattered patrols. They expect cautious advances. What they see instead is movement without end. Truck after truck after truck. A river of steel flowing toward the front. Inside each vehicle, ammunition, fuel, rations, artillery shells, spare parts. The weight of an advancing army. The convoy has a name painted on improvised signs. Red Ball Express. To the German soldiers watching from shattered farmhouses and tree lines, it does not look like logistics. It looks like momentum. And momentum, in late August 1944, is becoming decisive. June 6, 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy begins. Operation Overlord places more than 150,000 Allied troops on the beaches of northern France in a single day. In the weeks that follow, men and machines continue to pour ashore, American, British, and Canadian forces building strength inside a narrow coastal lodgment. Artificial harbors at Omaha and Gold Beaches, mulberries, are assembled piece by piece. Fuel arrives through temporary pipelines laid beneath the channel. Liberty ships unload tanks, artillery, food, medical supplies, and millions of gallons of gasoline. By late July, the Allied buildup is immense. Nearly 2 million men stand in Normandy. Thousands of vehicles crowd the Bocage country. But the German 7th Army still holds defensive lines behind hedgerows that fracture every advance into small, brutal engagements. On July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra begins. American heavy bombers strike a narrow corridor near St. Lo. Carpet bombing tears open the German front. Within days, U.S. forces break through the static hedgerow battle that had consumed June and July. Armored divisions surge through the gap at Avranches. The Third Army, activated under Lieutenant General George S. Patton, pivots east and south in rapid maneuver. The German line does not merely bend. It collapses. By mid-August, the Falaise pocket closes. Tens of thousands of German troops are killed, captured, or forced into chaotic retreat. Vehicles are abandoned along French roads. Horses pull artillery westward in desperation. The Wehrmacht begins withdrawing toward the Seine River. What follows is no longer a slow grind. It becomes pursuit. American armored columns advance at speeds few had predicted possible after the slog of Normandy. Infantry divisions ride atop tanks. Reconnaissance units leapfrog towns. French civilians emerge from cellars waving tricolor flags as Paris rises in revolt. On August 25, 1944, the French capital is liberated. Yet behind this dramatic advance lies a problem invisible to newspapers and frontline photographs. The armies are outrunning their supplies. Modern mechanized warfare runs on fuel. A single armored division can consume hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline per day. Tanks require ammunition in staggering quantities. Artillery batteries fire thousands of shells daily. Infantrymen need rations, medical bandages, replacement boots, spare rifle parts. In Normandy, the supply system had functioned through carefully organized beach depots. Material landed on the coast, moved a short distance inland, and distributed to divisions fighting within a limited radius. Now the front is racing eastward across France. Ports such as Cherbourg are damaged and operating below capacity. The Mulberry Harbor at Omaha had been destroyed by a storm in June. Rail lines across France are sabotaged, cratered by bombing, or in German retreating hands. Bridges are blown. Marshalling yards are wrecked. The infrastructure needed to support deep offensive operations barely exists. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAF, faces a growing crisis. The armies under General Dwight D. Eisenhower are advancing faster than the supply planners had projected. Patton's Third Army demands fuel at extraordinary rates to maintain pressure on retreating German forces. British and Canadian armies push toward Belgium and the Channel ports. Every commander requests priority. There is not enough transport capacity. Standard doctrine would call for rebuilding rail networks and capturing major ports before pushing further. But momentum is a weapon. German forces are disorganized, withdrawing toward the German frontier. If pressure is sustained, the war in Western Europe might be shortened. Stopping now would give the Wehrmacht time to regroup behind fortified positions such as the Siegfried Line. The decision becomes stark. Pause and consolidate, or improvise and keep moving. American planners choose improvisation. The U.S. Army Transportation Corps begins examining every available truck in Normandy. Thousands of vehicles, cargo carriers, engineering transports, even some assigned to administrative units, are reassigned to a single purpose: continuous supply movement from beach depots to forward armies. Priority roads are identified. Certain routes are designated one way to maximize flow. Military police will regulate traffic around the clock. Convoys will move day and night. Drivers will rest in rotation, but the trucks will not stop. This is not a long-term logistical system. It is an emergency measure. It will require discipline, fuel, spare parts, and relentless driving. Most of all, it will require men willing to sit behind steering wheels for 16 hours at a time, navigating blacked-out roads under threat of air attack or ambush. By late August 1944, the plan receives a name drawn from American railway terminology, used for express freight given top priority. The name is simple: Red Ball, and it is about to become the lifeline of the Allied advance across France. The Red Ball Express officially begins operations on August 25, 1944, the same day Paris is liberated. Its purpose is direct and urgent: move supplies from the Normandy beaches to the rapidly advancing American armies near the German frontier. At its peak, nearly 6,000 trucks operate daily along a network of designated routes stretching more than 300 miles. Two main corridors are marked across northern France. One road carries loaded trucks eastward. A parallel road carries empty trucks back west. Military police stand at crossroads, enforcing strict one-way movement. Civilian traffic is pushed aside. Convoys are given absolute priority. Red circular signs mark the path. A red ball painted against white background. Simple, visible, unmistakable. The operation runs continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Each GMC 2.5-ton truck carries roughly 5 tons of cargo, fuel in jerrycans, artillery shells stacked in wooden crates, small arms ammunition, medical supplies, K-rations, spare tank tracks, engine components, radio equipment, tires, everything an army requires to move, fight, and survive. By September 1944, Red Ball trucks are delivering more than 12,000 tons of supplies per day. Over the course of its existence, roughly 3 months, the operation will transport more than 400,000 tons. The drivers are predominantly African-American soldiers. Nearly 75% of Red Ball Express personnel are black servicemen serving in segregated units. Many have been assigned to service roles under the racial policies of the U.S. Army at the time. Yet in this emergency, their task becomes central to the success of the Western Allied advance. They drive in long, exhausting shifts, often exceeding prescribed limits. Many have minimal mechanical training. Breakdowns are common. Spare parts are scarce. Tires were thin against the constant friction of overloaded cargo. Convoys travel under blackout conditions at night. Headlights are hooded to narrow slits to reduce visibility from the air. Drivers rely on the dim glow of the vehicle ahead. Dust clouds hang thick over French roads, coating lungs and engines alike. Speed becomes essential. The German Luftwaffe, though weakened, remains capable of sporadic attacks. Strafing runs occur. Convoys scatter and regroup. In some sectors, retreating German units attempt ambushes. Yet the overwhelming momentum of Allied ground forces keeps enemy interference limited. Still, the risk is present. Drivers are instructed not to stop unless absolutely necessary. If a truck breaks down, it is pushed aside. Cargo is transferred to another vehicle. The line must continue moving. Fuel presents a particular challenge. The Allied advance consumes gasoline at unprecedented rates. Patton's Third Army alone requires hundreds of thousands of gallons daily. Without fuel, tanks become immobile steel. Artillery cannot reposition. Momentum dies. The Red Ball Express prioritizes fuel above all. Convoys of tanker trucks move in endless succession. The road hums with petroleum. German intelligence begins to report the phenomenon. Field reports from Wehrmacht units describe American columns that appear to have limitless supply. Despite rapid territorial gains, U.S. armored divisions do not stall. When resistance forms, artillery ammunition seems abundant. When vehicles break, replacement arrive. When units pause, fuel trucks appear within hours. To German officers accustomed to stretch supply lines in the Soviet Union, where fuel shortages frequently halted offensives, the scale is unsettling. The Allied armies are not tethered to railheads in the traditional European model. They are riding on wheels. Meanwhile, strategic debates unfold at higher levels. General Bernard Montgomery proposes a concentrated thrust in the north toward the Netherlands, what will become Operation Market Garden. Patton presses for continued eastward drive into Lorraine. Eisenhower balances these competing demands while managing finite supply resources. The Red Ball Express becomes a temporary bridge between ambition and capacity, but it is not without strain. By mid-September, the limits of improvisation begin to show. Trucks suffer mechanical exhaustion. Drivers collapse from fatigue. Fuel shortages reappear as the distance from Normandy increases. Ports such as Antwerp are captured, but not yet fully operational due to German control of the Scheldt estuary. Rail reconstruction efforts slowly progress, promising more sustainable logistics. Yet during these critical weeks, late August through early September 1944, the Red Ball Express sustains the fastest ground advance in American military history up to that point. From Normandy to the outskirts of Germany in a matter of weeks. German units retreat through Belgium and eastern France under constant pressure. Attempts to form cohesive defensive lines are complicated by the relentless pace of Allied maneuver. The speed itself becomes a weapon. What German soldiers witness is not simply an advancing army. It is an advancing system, one that feeds itself with mechanical precision, powered by industry across the Atlantic and drivers who rarely appear in headlines. The Red Ball Express is not glamorous. It has no dramatic beach landings or airborne drops. But without it, the pursuit across France would have slowed to a crawl. And that speed, visible on every French highway in August 1944, would soon shape the psychology of both armies facing one another across a collapsing front. Inside each truck sat a soldier rarely photographed on front pages. The majority were young African-American servicemen assigned to segregated transportation units. Many had trained in the American South before crossing the Atlantic. Some had never left their home states before 1943. Now they were navigating narrow medieval roads in rural France under blackout conditions. They drove for hours without relief. Regulations suggested rest cycles. Reality ignored them. When fuel was needed at the front, trucks moved. Sleep happened beside the road, under the vehicle, or in brief moments while mechanics patched worn engines. The trucks were often overloaded beyond standard capacity. 5 tons became 6. 6 became 7. Crates of artillery shells stacked higher than regulations allowed. Fuel drums wedged tightly along wooden side rails. Breakdowns were constant. Engines overheated in late summer heat. Tires shredded. Axles snapped. When a vehicle failed, the driver's responsibility was simple. Move it aside and keep the line flowing. Cargo was shifted to the next truck. No delay. The roads were thick with dust by day, heavy with condensation by night. Headlights were reduced to slits. Drivers followed the dim red glow ahead, judging distance by instinct. Many of these men had enlisted seeking dignity in uniform. In France, their mission became indispensable. Infantry divisions at the front depended on them completely. A rifleman in Lorraine might never know the name of the driver who delivered his ammunition. A tank crew racing toward Metz might not consider the convoy that filled its fuel tanks at dawn. But the connection was direct. The Red Ball Express was not abstract logistics. It was human endurance translated into movement. and German observers along French highways could see the human element clearly. Faces behind windshields, silhouettes in convoy lines, disciplined repetition hour after hour. An army that could sustain this tempo was not improvising blindly. It was adapting in motion. The Red Ball Express was never part of the original Overlord planning in this form. Allied logistics had anticipated gradual expansion from the beaches, supported by captured ports and repaired rail networks. The breakout after Operation Cobra accelerated beyond those assumptions. The response required rapid reorganization. Transportation battalions were consolidated into a centralized dispatch system. Routes were assigned exclusively for Red Ball traffic. Civilian vehicles were barred from designated highways. Military police checkpoints operated continuously, often under field conditions with minimal shelter. Traffic discipline became a tactical asset. Convoys were spaced tightly to maximize throughput. Trucks averaged speeds around 25 miles per hour, slow by civilian standards, but relentless in aggregate. When thousands of vehicles move at that pace without interruption, distance compresses. Loading depots near Normandy functioned as staging hubs. Supplies arrived by ship were sorted, stacked, and loaded onto outbound trucks within hours. Paperwork was simplified. Priority items, fuel and ammunition, were marked and dispatched immediately. The system bypassed damaged rail lines entirely. This flexibility stood in contrast to German logistical doctrine, which relied heavily on rail transport and horse-drawn support units. In the East, German offenses had frequently stalled when railheads lagged behind armored spearheads. In France, American forces inverted the problem. They built mobility into the supply chain itself. Wheels replaced rails. The scale startled German intelligence officers. Reports indicated American truck columns stretching for miles. Some Wehrmacht units estimated the volume inaccurately, assuming armor formations must be far larger than reality, simply because supplies seemed inexhaustible. The illusion of abundance became strategic pressure. When a defending force believes its opponent cannot be starved or delayed, morale shifts. Speed erodes confidence. The Red Ball Express did not defeat German divisions directly, but it denied them time to reorganize, time to reinforce, time to stabilize retreat. And in August 1944, time was a diminishing resource for the German army in the West. Every truck on the Red Ball route represented a larger story. The GMC 2.5-ton cargo truck, often called the Deuce and a Half, had been mass-produced in American factories at staggering rates. Hundreds of thousands were built between 1940 and 1945. Standardized parts allowed quick repairs, interchangeable components, simplified maintenance. The Red Ball Express was not only a transportation operation, it was a visible extension of American industrial capacity. Fuel originated in refineries across Texas and Oklahoma. Ammunition shells were forged in Midwestern plants. Spare tank tracks rolled off assembly lines in Detroit. Rations were packed in Chicago, Kansas City, and New York. All of it crossed the Atlantic. Despite U-boat threats earlier in the war, Allied shipping by mid-1944 had achieved overwhelming superiority. Liberty ships and tankers arrived in constant sequence at Normandy anchorage points. German soldiers watching American convoys in France were confronting not only trucks, but an ocean-spanning supply network. In contrast, Germany by 1944 faced fuel shortages, bombing damage to synthetic oil plants, and strained rail capacity. Allied air power targeted transportation hubs relentlessly. When German officers observed American trucks moving freely across French highways, the disparity became tangible. One army was tightening its logistical belt. The other was accelerating. The Red Ball Express made the difference visible at ground level, not through speeches or propaganda, through motion, and that motion would soon carry Allied forces to the borders of Germany itself. By late August 1944, German formations in the West were no longer maneuvering with confidence. They were withdrawing under pressure. Units that had survived Normandy were fragmented. Equipment losses in the Falaise pocket were catastrophic. Artillery pieces were abandoned for lack of towing vehicles. Fuel stocks were dangerously low. Luftwaffe air cover was sporadic at best. German officers along retreat routes reported a troubling pattern. American spearheads did not pause. Traditionally, mechanized offensives slowed as supply lines lengthened. This had been Germany's own experience in the Soviet Union in 1941 and again in 1942. Panzer divisions outran rail conversion teams. Fuel convoys struggled. Momentum faded. In France, Wehrmacht planners expected a similar pause from the Allies. Instead, reconnaissance patrols observed American armored columns appearing days, sometimes weeks, earlier than anticipated. Rear guard positions hastily organized near river crossings found themselves confronted by fresh U.S. units supported by full artillery allotments. Interrogations of captured American soldiers revealed a steady flow of food and fuel. Ammunition expenditure rates remained high, indicating no rationing. Reports from intelligence sections describe highways filled with U.S. trucks marked with red symbols, operating in continuous rotation. The implication was clear. The Americans had solved the pursuit problem. German divisions attempting to stabilize near the Seine found Allied forces pressing from multiple directions. When defensive lines formed near the Belgian border, they were quickly tested by units that showed no signs of supply exhaustion. For soldiers accustomed to the idea that distance itself could slow an enemy, this was disorienting. The Red Ball Express did not fire a shot, but it denied the Wehrmacht the breathing space it expected to find. The appearance of endless supply masked severe internal strain. Red Ball drivers faced punishing conditions. Convoys operated in heat that strained engines and human endurance alike. Maintenance crews worked with limited spare parts. Improvised repairs became common. Wire used where bolts were missing, patched tires stretched beyond safe tolerance. Accidents were frequent. Fatigue dulled reaction times. Trucks skidded on narrow roads. Mechanical failures triggered chain collisions in blackout conditions. Casualties occurred without enemy involvement. The system consumed vehicles at high rates. Some trucks were driven until engines failed permanently. Replacement parts were scavenged from disabled vehicles. Mechanics became as vital as drivers. Fuel for the trucks themselves also had to be transported, creating a self-feeding logistical loop. Every gallon delivered forward required additional fuel consumed en route. Commanders understood the operation could not last indefinitely. The Red Ball Express was an emergency artery, effective, but unsustainable over the long term. Rail repair units worked continuously behind advancing armies. Engineers reconstructed bridges destroyed during German retreat. Port facilities at Cherbourg and later Antwerp were cleared and expanded. By September, the distance from Normandy to the forward element stretched logistical elasticity to its limit. There were days when Patton's Third Army slowed, not for lack of will, but because fuel shipments could not keep pace with ambition. Tanks idled at roadside waiting for gasoline. Artillery units rationed shells temporarily. Even so, compared to historical norms of mechanized warfare, the tempo remained extraordinary. The Red Ball Express did not eliminate shortages. It reduced them just enough to preserve forward momentum during the most critical phase of pursuit. War is measured not only in territory gained or lost, but in perception. For Allied troops advancing across France, the constant arrival of supply trucks reinforced confidence. Fresh rations appeared. Ammunition stacks replenished quickly. Mail followed behind. Replacement equipment arrived faster than expected. The sight of convoys became reassurance. For German soldiers, the same sight suggested something else. Overextension had once been the Achilles heel of rapid offensives. In 1944, the German army itself suffered from precisely that vulnerability. Allied bombing disrupted rail movement inside Germany. Fuel shortages limited training and maneuver. Ersatz replacements lacked experience. When American trucks appeared in endless sequence along French highways, the psychological equation shifted. This was not an army exhausting itself in a reckless dash. It was an army sustained by industrial depth. Reports from German command channels increasingly reference American material superiority as a decisive factor. The phrase materielle Überlegenheit, material superiority, appeared repeatedly in assessments of Western Front conditions. The Red Ball Express embodied that superiority in visible form. Every truck was modest in size. No single vehicle carried overwhelming firepower. Yet in aggregate, thousands moving in coordination created an image of inexhaustibility. Momentum became expectation. Expectation became pressure. By early September 1944, the Allied advance had carried forces from Normandy to the outskirts of Germany and the Netherlands in little more than a month. German planners began preparing defensive strategies not around halting Allied momentum in open France, but around absorbing it at fortified frontiers. The pursuit phase was nearing its natural limits, and ahead lay the Siegfried Line, the Moselle River crossings, and strategic decisions that would test whether speed alone could end the war before winter. Early September 1944, the map of Western Europe has changed with startling speed. From the beaches of Normandy to the Meuse River, Allied forces have advanced more than 300 miles in just over 5 weeks. Paris is free. Brussels is liberated on September 3rd. Antwerp falls the next day, its vast port facilities captured intact, though still unusable until the Scheldt estuary can be cleared. But on the front lines near the German border, something shifts. The roads are longer now. From Normandy depots to the spearheads of Patton's Third Army near Metz, supply routes stretch to their extreme limit. The Red Ball Express continues operating at full intensity, but the distances are punishing. Trucks require more fuel to deliver fuel. Mechanical failures multiply. On September 1st, Patton receives orders to halt temporarily due to gasoline shortages. Tanks that had raced across France now sit motionless by roadside hedges. Armored columns that expected to continue pressing into the Saar region pause in defensive posture. Artillery units ration shells carefully. The German army, though battered, begins stabilizing behind natural defensive lines. The Moselle River, fortified towns, and eventually the Siegfried Line. The moment reveals the narrow margin on which the pursuit has operated. Throughout late August, German units retreating through France repeatedly expected the Americans to exhaust themselves. They anticipated the familiar pattern. Advancing armor outruns supply, pauses, reorganizes, allowing defenders time to regroup. Instead, for nearly a month, the Red Ball Express prevented that pause. It delivered over 400,000 tons of supplies in roughly 82 days. At peak capacity, nearly 12,500 tons per day moved eastward. Thousands of drivers maintained the flow despite breakdowns, accidents, and fatigue. German intelligence officers studying Allied movement reports begin recognizing the pattern clearly. The speed of advance was not reckless. It was calculated. American command accepted temporary inefficiencies and vehicle attrition in exchange for sustained operational tempo. They prioritized forward pressure over logistical elegance. 4 German divisions attempting to form coherent defensive lines in late August. This mattered enormously. At the Seine River crossings in late August, U.S. forces arrived sooner than anticipated. At the Belgian border in early September, American armored elements appeared before defensive works were complete. At crossings near Verdun and Nancy, German units found themselves engaged before supply dumps were secured. In operational terms, the Red Ball Express compressed German reaction time across the entire Western Front. But now, in September, the physical reality of distance asserts itself. Trucks wear out. Fuel shortages recur. The capture of Antwerp offers future promise. Yet until the Scheldt is cleared of German forces, its docks remain idle. Command debates intensify. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery advocates a concentrated thrust through the Netherlands, Operation Market Garden, arguing that a narrow, well-supplied corridor could bypass the Siegfried Line entirely. Patton pushes for renewed fuel priority to continue driving east into Germany's industrial heartland. Eisenhower faces a logistical truth. Resources cannot fully support both ambitions simultaneously. The Red Ball Express has carried the Allied advance farther and faster than anticipated, but it cannot alone sustain simultaneous deep offensives across the entire front. On the German side, field reports note the slowing of American tempo. Where once U.S. armored columns seemed to arrive with uninterrupted supply, now pauses appear. Intelligence officers interpret this cautiously. They do not mistake it for weakness, but they recognize opportunity. Defensive lines along the west wall, the Siegfried Line, begin receiving reinforcements. Concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, Dragon's Teeth fortifications. German engineers, working under pressure, attempt to rebuild cohesion. Yet even as the tempo moderates, the damage from August is irreversible. The Wehrmacht in France has lost vast quantities of equipment. Entire formations have been shattered. Strategic depth west of Germany has vanished. The Red Ball Express achieved its essential objective. It prevented an orderly German withdrawal across France. Instead, the retreat became hurried, fractured, and materially catastrophic. In early September 1944, as convoys continue rumbling eastward, the psychological effect lingers. German soldiers along the frontier have seen the highways filled with American trucks. They understand what it means. Behind every U.S. infantry division stands an industrial system capable of replacing losses faster than Germany can inflict them. The pursuit may slow, but the imbalance remains. And as autumn approaches, the question shifts from how fast the Allies can advance to whether Germany can withstand the weight that has already arrived at its doorstep. September 1944 does not bring a dramatic collapse of Germany's western defenses. It brings a hardening. Along the Moselle River near Metz, German forces anchor themselves to fortified positions. The city, surrounded by pre-war French forts integrated into German defensive planning, becomes a focal point. Patton's Third Army probes the line repeatedly. Artillery thunders across the river valleys. Infantry attempts crossings under fire. But gasoline remains the invisible constraint. The Red Ball Express continues operating. Yet its efficiency declines as distance stretches from Normandy to eastern France. A truck that once completed a round trip in a day now requires several, where compounds, maintenance units struggle to keep pace. By mid-September, daily tonnage begins to fluctuate. The operation still delivers thousands of tons, but no longer at the peak achieved in late August. Rail lines slowly return to service. Engineers repair bridges and clear debris. Ports begin to increase throughput. The emergency phase is transitioning. Yet during this very window, German High Command assesses the Western Front with urgency. Adolf Hitler demands stabilization. Field commanders report severe shortages, fuel especially. Panzer divisions report limited mobility. Infantry divisions are under strength. Luftwaffe air support remains inconsistent. Still, a defensive line inside Germany offers advantages that France could not. Interior lines, shorter supply distances, fortified zones prepared years earlier. The German army's expectation in August had been simple. The Americans would stall naturally as their supply chain stretched. Instead, for weeks, the Red Ball Express defied that expectation. By the time American spearheads reached the approaches to the Siegfried Line, Germany had already lost operational flexibility in Western Europe. The collapse in France was not gradual. It was accelerated. Captured German officers later described the shock of encountering American forces deep inside France so quickly after the Normandy breakout. Some had anticipated defensive pauses around the Seine or Belgian frontier. Instead, American armored units appeared almost continuously. The turning point was not a single battle. It was cumulative pressure. Every day the Red Ball Express operated at full capacity translated into miles gained before the enemy could reset. Even when fuel shortages in September forced pauses, those pauses occurred at Germany's frontier, not deep inside France. That distinction mattered strategically. Meanwhile, Operation Market Garden launches on September 17, 1944. British and American airborne divisions drop into the Netherlands, aiming to seize bridges across major rivers. Ground forces attempt to push north along a narrow corridor. Logistical prioritization shifts again. Supplies are redirected to support the northern thrust. The Red Ball Express continues operating, but broader logistical networks begin assuming more responsibility as ports and railways recover. The emergency artery is gradually integrating into a more permanent circulatory system, yet its impact is already written across the map. From August 25th to mid-September, Allied forces advanced roughly 200 miles beyond the Normandy lodgment. That pace was historically extraordinary for mechanized armies operating across contested territory. German soldiers on the receiving end experienced a form of strategic compression. Positions prepared for defense were bypassed. Withdrawal routes became clogged. Rear echelons encountered American patrols earlier than intelligence estimates predicted. The sight of endless truck convoys was not symbolic. It explained the phenomenon. By October 1944, the Red Ball Express begins winding down as rail transport assumes greater share supply movement. Officially, the operation ends in mid-November. In total, approximately 6,000 vehicles and 23,000 personnel participated. Over 412,000 tons of supplies were delivered. Fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts reached the front in volumes that preserved operational momentum during the most fluid phase of the Western campaign. The German army would recover enough cohesion to launch a final offensive in December, the Ardennes counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. But that offensive would emerge from within Germany's borders, not from a stabilized line in France. The opportunity to halt the Allies west of the frontier had slipped away in August, and much of that lost opportunity flowed eastward along French highways, carried in canvas-covered cargo beds, marked by a simple red circle. As autumn rains begin to fall across Lorraine and the Ardennes, the great pursuit phase concludes. The front stiffens. Winter approaches. But the geography of the war in the West has been permanently altered. The Red Ball Express did not win the war in a single stroke. It shifted the battlefield hundreds of miles closer to Germany, and in doing so, it ensured that the next great struggle would take place not across France, but on the threshold of the Reich itself. By late autumn 1944, the emergency phase of Allied logistics in France had ended. The Red Ball Express officially ceased operations on November 16, 1944. Rail lines, once cratered and twisted by bombing and retreat, were steadily returning to service. Engineers had rebuilt bridges across the Seine and other rivers. The port of Antwerp, cleared after the Battle of the Scheldt in November, began operating at full capacity. Supplies could now move by ship directly into Belgium, dramatically shortening overland routes. The improvisation that defined August and September gave way to structure, yet the consequences of those improvised weeks were already fixed in strategic reality. When historians measure the Western Front in 1944, they often divide it into phases: Normandy, the breakout, the pursuit, the stabilization, and the Ardennes counteroffensive. The Red Ball Express sits squarely at the center of the pursuit phase. Without it, the breakout from Normandy would have slowed within days. Instead, Allied forces crossed the Seine, liberated Paris, entered Belgium, and reached Germany's frontier in rapid succession. The German army was denied the chance to re-establish a coherent defensive line in France. The cost to Germany during the retreat was staggering. Tens of thousands of vehicles were lost. Artillery pieces were abandoned. Fuel depots were captured or destroyed. Units arrived at the Siegfried Line understrength and disorganized. Entire formations required reconstitution before they could resume coordinated defense. German field reports from September and October increasingly emphasized material inferiority. Fuel shortages plagued armored formations. Replacement equipment arrived slowly. Allied air superiority compounded the imbalance. In contrast, the United States Army demonstrated the capacity to project industrial strength across an ocean and sustain maneuver warfare deep inland. The Red Ball Express became a case study in adaptive logistics. Military analysts later examined the operation not as a perfect system, but as an example of rapid reallocation under pressure. It revealed both strengths and limitations. Strength: the ability to mobilize thousands of vehicles and drivers almost overnight. Limitation: dependence on enormous fuel consumption and vehicle attrition that could not be sustained indefinitely without rail and port restoration. For the drivers themselves, recognition was limited during the war. The African-American soldiers, who comprised the majority of Red Ball personnel, performed their duties under segregation. They faced discrimination within the armed forces, even as they executed one of the most critical logistical operations of a European campaign. Yet their contribution was measurable. More than 400,000 tons of supplies delivered, thousands of miles driven, continuous operation under stress. In the months following the Red Ball Express, many of these transportation units transitioned into broader logistical roles as the Allied advance continued into Germany. Some drivers later supported supply lines during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when German forces attempted to rupture the Allied front in the Ardennes. The German counteroffensive briefly reversed the direction of momentum. But even during the bulge, Allied supply systems, now strengthened by restored rail and port networks, proved resilient. Fuel and ammunition continued reaching frontline units despite snow, cold, and enemy attack. The emergency improvisation of August had evolved into institutional strength by winter. From a strategic standpoint, the Red Ball Express shortened the distance between Normandy and Germany's industrial core faster than German planners had believed possible. It transformed the Western campaign from a slow territorial grind into a rapid displacement of the battlefield. For German soldiers who had expected operational pauses to buy time, the shock was not theatrical. It was practical. The enemy had arrived sooner than predicted, and that acceleration reshaped every decision that followed. As 1944 turned toward its final months, the war in the West entered a harsher phase. Fortified lines, winter weather, entrenched resistance, but it unfolded on German soil, a reality that would not have materialized so quickly without the relentless movement of trucks across France in late summer. By November 1944, the map of Western Europe reflected the speed of the August-September pursuit. The Allies had advanced hundreds of miles beyond the Normandy lodgment. Paris was secure. Brussels and Antwerp were under Allied control. The Siegfried Line, Germany's fortified western frontier, stood as the next major obstacle, but would face a foe already accustomed to mobility, supply, and momentum. The Red Ball Express had altered the calculus of logistics in modern warfare. It demonstrated that mechanized armies could sustain rapid advances even when traditional infrastructure, ports, railroads, bridges, was compromised. Convoys of thousands of trucks, moving day and night, could deliver essential supplies faster than defenders anticipated. The operation made logistics itself a weapon, shaping the battlefield without firing a shot. For German commanders, the consequences were clear and sobering. Retreating forces in northern France had been unable to regroup effectively. Units that might have resisted near the Seine were forced to continue east under constant pressure. Artillery and armored units lost cohesion. Fuel shortages and destroyed supply depots compounded the retreat's disarray. Historians note that the Wehrmacht in the West never fully recovered operational initiative during the final months of 1944. The human cost on both sides was tangible. Red Ball drivers endured exhaustion, mechanical failures, and accidents. Many trucks broke down permanently. Soldiers faced the challenge of navigating narrow, blacked-out roads under the stress of maintaining continuous flow. Yet their success ensured that U.S. armored divisions remained operational, supplied, and confident in their forward push. The psychological impact was equally profound. American troops saw the constant arrival of supplies as reassurance. German soldiers, by contrast, witnessed a near-inexhaustible system of logistics advancing alongside enemy tanks and infantry. That perception of unstoppable momentum eroded morale, reinforcing the sense that the Allied advance was not only inevitable but faster and more effective than expected. Industrial might became visible in convoy columns stretching across northern France. Each truck was a symbol of American production. Fuel refined in Texas, artillery forged in the Midwest, ammunition packed and shipped from factories thousands of miles away. The scale and efficiency of the system could not be matched by Germany, whose synthetic oil plants were bombed, transportation networks were fragmented, and resources were dwindling. By the end of November, the emergency phase of supply had transitioned into a more sustainable logistical network. Railroads resumed operation. Rebuilt bridges carried trains and convoys deeper into occupied Europe. Ports became functional, reducing reliance on improvised truck lines. Yet the Red Ball Express had already done its most important work, enabling the rapid Allied pursuit, preventing German reorganization in France, and shifting the battlefield to Germany itself. In broader terms, the operation highlighted the strategic importance of logistics in modern mechanized warfare. Military historians point to the Red Ball Express as a turning point in operational planning, illustrating that speed, coordination, and industrial depth could overwhelm even well-prepared defensive positions. It foreshadowed how supply chains would define combat effectiveness in subsequent conflicts and emphasized that victory often depended as much on what moved behind the front lines as what engaged on them. The Red Ball Express was not glamorous. It did not involve epic battles or cinematic charges across beaches. Yet its impact was decisive. German soldiers who witnessed the relentless eastward flow understood that the enemy's strength lay not only in tanks or artillery, but in the very arteries that fed them. Momentum, speed, and the capacity to sustain advance had become as formidable as any weapon. As the front stabilized along Germany's borders, the lessons of those frantic weeks remained evident. Logistics could shape strategy, industry could dictate tempo, and human endurance, driving thousands of miles under extreme conditions, could tip the balance of campaigns. The Red Ball Express, in short, had reshaped the Western Front. The pursuit across France, once a gamble, became a demonstration of what coordinated supply, industrial power, and relentless discipline could achieve. Germany's retreat was no longer orderly. It was accelerated, forced, and psychologically taxing. The stage was set for the final months of the war in the West, on German soil, under conditions already influenced by the speed and reach of American logistics. The story of the Red Ball Express is a reminder that war is won as much by supply as by strategy, by movement as much as by firepower. What German soldiers could not believe in late summer 1944 was not the courage of American troops. They had seen that before, but the speed, consistency, and scale at which an entire army could sustain itself while advancing hundreds of miles into enemy territory. In the dusty highways of northern France, under blackout conditions and through exhaustion, thousands of drivers transformed industrial might into operational momentum. Tanks did not idle. Infantry units did not pause. Artillery batteries were continuously replenished. The flow of men and machines became seamless, almost organic. Every mile of highway carried the invisible power of American industry. Fuel refined thousands of miles away, shells forged in Midwestern factories, and trucks mass-produced to precise standards. The psychological effect on the German army was as potent as the physical one. Expectations of natural pause, built into decades of military doctrine, were shattered. Retreating formations found themselves pressed relentlessly. Defensive lines that might have stabilized the front were bypassed or tested before they were ready. For commanders and soldiers alike, the speed of advance was a constant shock, a measure of an enemy who had mastered not only combat but logistics itself. Yet the Red Ball Express was also a human story. Young men, predominantly African-American soldiers serving in segregated units, endured fatigue, mechanical failures, and the relentless pressure of moving tonnage that could decide the course of a campaign. Their dedication ensured that industrial power was translated into battlefield effect. Without them, momentum would have stalled, and the Western Front might have looked very different by autumn 1944. Ultimately, the Red Ball Express illustrates a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Victory depends on the integration of people, technology, and infrastructure. Strategy alone is insufficient. It requires a lifeline, maintained day and night, to carry it forward. In those dusty convoys, Germany witnessed not just an advancing army, but the embodiment of operational ingenuity, discipline, and industrial capacity. The highways of France in 1944 remind us that sometimes the most decisive weapon is movement itself, and that speed, when sustained by planning, endurance, and vision, can reshape the fate of nations.